For decades, El Salvador was held hostage by violent gangs, known primarily for the notorious MS-13 and Barrio 18 factions. These criminal organizations ruled the streets, extorting local businesses, controlling neighborhoods, and terrorizing civilians. Successive governments tried and failed to dismantle these deeply entrenched gangs. Yet, everything began to change in 2022 under the leadership of President Nayib Bukele, a bold political leader who promised to crack down on gang violence like never before. So, how did El Salvador go from a country under siege to one where the streets feel safer than they have in years? Let's step into the unprecedented measures that have reshaped the country and examine the impact this dramatic transformation has had. The gang's stronghold in El Salvador. El Salvador's gang problem is deeply rooted in the country's turbulent history. Following years of civil war in the 1980s, many Salvadoran refugees fled to the United States, particularly to California. It was in the US that many young Salvadoran immigrants joined or formed gangs to protect themselves from other street gangs. Over time, some of these groups like MS-13 and Barrio 18 became notorious for their extreme violence and criminal activities. When these gang members were deported back to El Salvador, they found fertile ground to continue their operations. In the 1990s and 2000s, a power vacuum in the government and weak security forces allowed these gangs to take control of many urban areas. At their peak, these gangs not only committed crimes, but effectively governed certain neighborhoods, imposing strict rules and punishing those who disobeyed. The government's responses over the years, including various mano dura, or iron fist policies, arrested thousands of gang members. However, these efforts did little to dismantle the gang networks or prevent their resurgence. In fact, many gangs strengthened their ranks from behind bars, using prisons as operational hubs. The turning point: Bukele's state of emergency. Everything changed in March 2022. Following a horrific wave of gang violence that left 87 people dead in a single weekend, President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency. Unlike previous attempts to control the gangs, Bukele's approach was swift, extreme, and unrelenting. Under this state of emergency, constitutional rights were suspended. This meant that the police and military could arrest suspected gang members without warrants, detain them indefinitely, and significantly loosen the rules governing due process. Essentially, the government had free rein to target anyone suspected of being involved in gang activities. Within 2 months, more than 33,000 people were arrested. By November 2023, over 72,000 arrests had been made, including both hardened criminals and those suspected of gang affiliations or collaboration. This heavy-handed crackdown went beyond the top gang leaders. The government targeted the entire structure: homeboys, aspiring members, and collaborators. This approach crippled the gang's ability to communicate and organize, effectively neutralizing their operations on the streets. Legal reforms bolstered the crackdown. Bukele's state of emergency was just one part of the strategy. To further ensure that gang members would not return to the streets, the government passed several legal reforms. These included increased sentences for gang membership, reduced legal protections for minors involved in gang activities, and changes to anti-gang laws that allowed authorities to arrest anyone who even remotely aided gang activities. By broadening the definition of who could be considered a gang member, the government expanded its reach, arresting not only full-fledged gang members, but also people suspected of collaboration, such as lookouts or messengers. This widened net allowed security forces to arrest tens of thousands more people, dealing a massive blow to the gang's lower levels of operation. Dismantling gang territories. One of the most significant impacts of this crackdown has been the dismantling of gang-controlled territories. Before Bukele's administration, entire neighborhoods were under the firm control of gangs. Civilians had to follow strict rules imposed by the gangs, often needing permission just to cross from one area to another. Those who disobeyed these rules faced harsh punishments, including death. Insight Crime, an investigative group that monitored the crackdown, reported that by mid-2023, many of these once gang-dominated areas had been completely transformed. Residents no longer lived in fear of extortion or gang retaliation. Public spaces that were once abandoned or controlled by the gangs were reclaimed by the community. Recreational activities like inter-community soccer tournaments were revived, symbolizing a newfound freedom for Salvadorans who had been held captive by gang influence for years. The financial impact on gangs. Aside from territorial control, one of the key ways gangs maintained their power was through extortion. MS-13 and Barrio 18 heavily extorted local businesses, demanding daily or monthly payments under the threat of violence. Many businesses paid because the alternative often meant death or destruction of their livelihoods. In major urban areas like San Salvador, extortion brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the gangs. But as Bukele's crackdown progressed, the gangs' ability to maintain these extortion rackets collapsed. With thousands of their members arrested and their networks disrupted, the gangs could no longer enforce their extortion schemes at the same scale. This resulted in a sharp decline in the gangs' primary revenue stream, further weakening their power and influence over the population. A controversial approach. While Bukele's war on gangs has brought relief to many Salvadorans, it has also drawn significant criticism from human rights groups. The mass arrests, suspension of legal rights, and lack of due process have raised concerns about government overreach. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and Cristosal have flagged widespread abuse, with many individuals being arrested on flimsy or unverified accusations. There are also concerns about how sustainable this crackdown will be in the long term. Although the gangs have been weakened, some experts argue that they are far from defeated. Bukele's government itself admitted that around 42,000 gang members and collaborators were still at large as of late 2023. Furthermore, with so many people imprisoned without trial or formal charges, there is a risk that the prison system could again become a breeding ground for future gang activities. The path forward for El Salvador. Despite the controversies, there is no denying the immediate impact of Bukele's policies. The streets of El Salvador are quieter, and many citizens feel safer than they have in decades. The government's aggressive tactics have significantly reduced the influence of gangs in major urban centers, and the economy is beginning to recover as extortion rackets disappear. However, the challenge moving forward will be how the government manages the aftermath of this crackdown. Can they maintain peace without relying on indefinite emergency measures? Will the judicial system regain its strength to ensure fair trials for those arrested? And most importantly, how will El Salvador prevent the resurgence of gangs once the emergency measures are lifted? Only time will tell. But for now, El Salvador stands as a powerful case study of how a government's unwavering stance on crime can bring about dramatic, if controversial, change. A new era for El Salvador. El Salvador's journey from gang-infested streets to a sense of newfound security is nothing short of remarkable. While President Bukele's drastic measures have drastically reduced gang violence and restored peace to many communities, the long-term effects of this approach remain to be seen. Will El Salvador sustain this peace, or could these heavy-handed tactics spark future issues? Only time will tell. If you found this story insightful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into global issues and the forces shaping our world.